Hey guys, welcome back to Bearcat Outdoors Week 4. Today we're talking to Andrew Norby, who is the former president of the Bass Fishing Club here at Northwest. He's going to be telling us a little bit about fall fishing, some tips and tactics that he uses. You're not going to want to miss it right here on Bearcat Outdoors.
Up here in Northwest Missouri, fall is approaching fast. Temperatures are dropping. In the past few weeks, the temperatures went from being 80 to 90 degrees to now down to 40 and 50 at night. Sometimes a high of 55 or 60 degrees in the day. Here on Mazingo Lake, my home lake, the bass start feeding a lot more. They start gearing up for winter. They kind of act like a big bear wanting to feed before it hibernates. These bass will start chasing schools of shad. They'll start getting a lot more active, and you need to start targeting the bass with moving baits on the lakes. Here on Mazingo, I'm using baits that resemble shad because that is what these fish are chasing. I'll go to a spinner bait, I'll go to a square bill, or I'll use a topwater bait such as a ribbit style frog or a buzz bait. And because these fish are feeding more, they're more apt to chase the bait versus when you're using a worm or a jig, you're just dragging it and going really slow. You don't have to do that as much in the fall because these fish are already in that feeding mode. They want to eat your bait most of the time, even with these cold fronts coming in and the weather changing because fall is approaching. So let's talk a little more specifically about the baits. I mentioned throwing a spinner bait. I like to throw it, you can throw it almost anywhere actually. I'll use a white colored one usually, or white and chartreuse. The second type of bait I like using is a topwater. I mentioned a topwater ribbit frog or a buzz bait. I like throwing a ribbit frog in sparse grass and a buzz bait in open water, and then I'll even throw a hollow body frog when there's mats of grass. But right now on Mazingo Lake, there's a lot of sparse grass, and these fish get up feeding on shad in between the grass, and you throw that ribbit frog right over the grass and it'll plop and just make a little noise and sounds like some water bubbling, and those bass will be attracted to it and they'll blow up right in between the patches of grass. I've caught a ton this year already on ribbit frogs. When I'm fishing more open water or the edge of the grass, if that's where the fish are hanging and feeding on shad, I'll throw a buzz bait. You can fish this buzz bait a little bit faster, you get better hookups with it as well, but it does not come through the grass. And since Mazingo is mostly grass around the edges, I'll typically stick with that ribbit frog. Your best conditions for fishing topwater are when it's overcast, kind of rainy, windy, not too much wind. If it's more wind, I'll throw a buzz bait. A little less wind, I'll throw a ribbit frog. But that is your best conditions for fishing it. And then the third type of bait I like using in the fall is a square bill. They make different size square bills, but I typically go with the size 1.5. It's about 2.5 inches long. The best place I like using them is around rocks. What you want to do with that square bill is cast it and parallel the rocks. So you want to sit with your boat right up against the rocks and make a long cast so you parallel it. And then you bump that square bill off the rocks. And when it bounces off the rocks, it puts out a little, I don't know if it's a sound or a vibration that just drives fish insane. But that is when you're going to get bit. Here on Mazingo Lake, there's a few areas on the lake that have rocky banks. I'll start out, if the wind's blowing out of the south, then I will fish banks on the north side that the wind is blowing into. You want to fish your windier banks because that's where the water's churning, that's where these fish are going to be feeding. The shad will get pushed up against the rocks and they'll get injured, and the bass will come and swoop in and eat them. But until the water drops below probably 50 degrees, you're good to use all of these baits I've talked about. They're great baits for fishing in the fall, and you're sure to catch some fish on them.
Thanks, Andrew. Those are some great tips. When we come right back, we're going to talk a little bit more in depth about some fall pond fishing right here on Bearcat Outdoors. Hey guys, welcome back to Bearcat Outdoors. Andrew just told us a little bit about fall fishing tactics. Now he's going to tell us a little bit more about targeting these fish in the ponds.
Generally speaking, you can use kind of the same lures you would in a lake at ponds as well. The fish don't have as many places to go in ponds. Generally, they can't go out and hide in a deep creek channel. You may have 1 or 2 creek channels in your pond, but they're not going to be very deep. A lot of times you'll have little stumps or trees in your pond. Those are a good place to target fish around. If it's a bright sunny day and you're fishing a pond, you might have to slow down a little bit. I'd start with the spinner bait. If it's an overcast, rainy day, I'd probably go with the top water again, kind of like you would at a lake. Some lures I haven't really talked about. If it's calm and sunny and there's no wind or anything, these fish might not be chasing bait as well as they normally do in the fall. And I would switch to a little weightless worm, a Senko, or a little shaky head. Just size down and use something a little smaller. These fish will be a little lethargic as the water cools off. So you may need to do that just on your calm, sunny days where the fish are not feeding too well. The lakes and ponds are still close to 70 degrees. With this cold front, they probably drop down to about 65 degrees is all. It takes water a lot longer to cool off than it does the air temperatures. So don't be afraid to throw a top water if it's 40 degrees in the morning, because those lakes will still be, upper 60s probably. You can use a lot of these same baits in both your ponds and lakes. You just got to be able to adapt to the conditions you're facing, what the weather's doing, the water clarity in the ponds. If it's muddy, use something bright or something really dark that puts off a shadow. If it's clear water, use something more natural looking with like a green pumpkin color or a white color, looks like a shad or whatever the fish are feeding on. But I would give these baits a try if you're going out and trying to fish in the fall, and I would think you could catch some fish on them anywhere you go.
Thanks for tuning into Bearcat Outdoors today, guys. Andrew taught us quite a bit about targeting these fish during the fall. Don't forget to catch us next week, Monday through Thursday at 6:50 p.m. on KNWT Channel 8. Also, check us out on our YouTube channel, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, right here on Bearcat Outdoors.